All right, so let's do this. All right, what's up, guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Joannis or Joe Hatagwa. I'm a Sierra Leonean American living in West Africa currently. Now, we're trying something different today. We are going live. We're attempting to go live from two different devices because the camera on one device is not working today. So what I need to know is, can you guys hear me? But before we do, actually, if you guys want to know what's been going on the continent of Africa over the last week, then this is the video for you. All right, so hopefully that worked. Okay, it says my sound is crystal clear. That's what YOA says. Yeah, what's up, yeah? Shout out to you. What's up, yeah? Can you guys? Okay, so let me know where you guys are watching from, and if you can hear me on Instagram. I want to know where you guys are watching from, and if you can hear me. We're going to talk about the news that's happened around the continent of Africa, and we're going to get my opinion. And we're going to get your opinion. But first, let me know where you guys are watching from. So I know Yaz probably watching from the UK. What do we got? Oh, we got Libya. Dr. Radwan from Libya. That's new. That's the first person from Libya. We Working 83 from the UK. Okay. Lizelle 212 is from Miami. Shout out to Arnacia. Arnacia is calling it, watching from Freetown, Sierra Leone, or somewhere in the world. I don't know if she wants me to say where she is. Nubian Treasures, Handcrafted said, peace and blessings. Where are you watching from, Nubian Treasures, Handcrafted? Blue something something, Miami, Florida, USA, North America. Yes, you can hear me. Nice. So Yaz says, what's up, Joe? Excited for today's episode. And as always, it's the consistency. Thank you. Always. Every Monday. Got to go live every Monday. Of course, of course. Yaz a content creator as well. She has a travel company called Talking Drums. If you guys saw that episode of me on the Sound of Accra podcast, it's because Yaz put me in touch with the host and the owner of the Sound of Accra podcast. So shout out to Yaz. Anne-Marie Harding says hello from London. Miss P is here. What's up, Miss P? So we got some folks that are always joining, and I appreciate you guys. All right, so let's see on Instagram where people are watching from. We got Nubian Treasures Handcrafted is from ATL. Let's see. Who else do we got? Who else do we have? G White Teach is from Vallejo, California. Cool. We got CC Barnes from Texarkana, Texas. Okay. We got Steezy Jet SA from South Africa. Nubian is driving home, so keep your hands on the wheel. Don't be typing. Do not type while you're driving. Okay, Kika Moonlight, of course, is from Nigeria. Shout out to you. You've been joining the last couple times. Classic 2 times from Georgia. We got Adonish Alabi, from Beirut, Lebanon. So a couple of places that are new today. Wow. So Solo Her says, I've been subscribed to you for a while, but never got a notification until today. YouTube's whack. Okay. Nice to catch you live. I appreciate it. I'm glad that you've been subscribed for a while. I appreciate that. Always appreciate the long-time subscribers. You know, you guys have kept this channel going through our ups and our downs and through it all. And it's only been 2.5 years, and there's been a lot that's happened on this channel. So I appreciate you for joining. All right, so Ron Bizzle says from Florida, but originally from Senegal. So you're in Florida right now, I guess, but originally from Senegal is what I presume. Cool. What else we got? We got Beirut. We got Russell is from California. We have CC Bar says great sound. Good. I'm glad the sound is good. Kika Moonlight saying hello. Donnell Greens from ATL. We got PR Native Son is from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Kika Moonlight is, of course, from Delta State, Nigeria. Ta Lus is from Miami. Dale King is from London. What's up? Fashion DRJ is watching from Chicago. We got Machelba is from South Africa. We got Alkembolon Goddess, sorry, is from the DMV. Call me 40 is from Nigeria. Okay, we got a pretty good representation around the world. I can't believe we had Beirut. We got PR Native Son is originally from Puerto Rico. It makes sense. That's why your name is PR Native Son. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, Ms. Chill says GE Blessed Eternity, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Fun fact, I've been to Pittsburgh once. I went to a Pirates and Phillies game in Pittsburgh. That was the longest sports event of my life. I'm not a baseball fan, and baseball doesn't have time limits. So it was a long, boring game. But shout out to Pittsburgh. And Wiz Khalifa, Mac Miller, and anyone else who's from the Pittsburgh area. A friend of mine went to the University of Pittsburgh, actually. Okay, cool. So we're going to get into today's content. We're going to talk about the news from around the continent over the last couple of weeks. We haven't had a chance to talk about it. Next week, what I'd like to talk about is how Africa has been impacted by the Israel-Palestine conflict. I wanted to take some time to really do a deep dive on the history, on everything that's happened, where we are today, up-to-date information. It's been about 4 or 5 weeks since the recent escalation. And so I wanted to have a conversation about where Africa stands on that. And that's ever-changing. So I will be doing something on that in the very near future. So be prepared for that, because that is coming soon. Okay, so before I hold on one second. Let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to get me up on the big screen. So I have 2 devices logged in at the same time, if you can't tell. So it's taking a little while for me to kind of get this set up properly, because this MacBook that I'm using, the camera does not seem to be connected. Shout out to a non-working camera. And so I am going to have to get that fixed ASAP. But in the meantime, we got Andre here from Camilla, Georgia. What's up, Andre from Camilla, Georgia? Appreciate you joining. Ron says, I'll be in Sierra Leone this month. Okay, for your citizenship, I would imagine. I will be here to see some of the folks who are getting their citizenship. So I look forward to that. All right, cool. So we're going to get to some news around the continent. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm here to talk about it. So there's a lot of news. I only covered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories. And then we'll give some time to ask questions. I know people always have questions when they join about what it's like for me living in West Africa, specifically Sierra Leone right now, but I lived in Ghana for 2 years prior. Some more about me for those of you who are new to joining the lives. I am a social media influencer. Also, I have a social media agency, and separately for that, I've had an entire career in the digital advertising space, helping brands find their audiences on mobile devices and on the web. And so I've worked at places like Hulu in the States, which is now a part of the Disney umbrella. And I've also worked at Jumia in Africa as the country head of advertising for Ghana at Jumia, which is an e-commerce company in Africa. So my experience kind of spans across the globe. I've worked at a company based in Germany as well. So I've worked at a lot of different places around the world. So I have a pretty global context for business. And so I've also been advising startups on the continent of Africa based on my experience internationally. So that's a little bit about me and who I am. Let's get into the stories. Let me make this a slideshow. And then let's see. Salon Internet. Bear with me, guys. The internet's very, very slow, and it's moving at a speed in which, it's not ideal. So give me a second. Let me share my screen. Okay. In the meantime, does anybody have any questions for me? I want to answer any questions that you might have. Uh, let's see. All right. I am going to share the full screen. Let me know if you guys can see it. Okay, we got full screen mode going. The good thing about being logged into two devices and with one screen only working on my MacBook, I can see your comments on the other phone here. So in case any comments come up, we'll answer them. So make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Share this with anybody you know who's planning to move to the continent, who has questions about what's going on. We Working 83 is asking where I'm from. So I am born and raised in the United States. I lived in New York until I was 16, but I was going to boarding school that whole time. I moved back to New York as an adult, as an 18-year-old, or I think I had just turned 19 when I moved back to New York. Lived in New York for a while, maybe about 15 years. Then I spent 4 years in LA, and then I spent the last 3 years here on the continent of Africa. So that's kind of really where I've lived in terms of where I called home. But I've also visited 20 plus countries around the world as well. And we have 5 countries on the continent of Africa, and we're gonna have 6 very shortly at the end of the year. All right, so that's a little bit about me. Let's get into this content. So make sure, if you guys know anybody who's looking to understand a little bit more about living on the continent, my content is to help them make a decision to visit, move, invest on the continent of Africa. That's everything I do is based around that premise, right? Of those 3 main things is what I'm trying to get people to do. But at the very least, they need to visit. That's the goal. And so many of you who are visiting the content, visit the continent, find the content that way. And others of you who are curious about visiting and want to know what it's like, or want to see what a firsthand look of what it's like to have lived in Ghana for 2 years and then now in Sierra Leone, that's what this channel is all about. The Instagram page has a little bit of that, and then it has some other things as well. But overall, that's what it's about. So Apple Watch plug 215, or as I guess 215. I'm guessing that's a Philly area code, right? 215. I can't remember. Want to invest ASAP and move? Well, get to trip at least to the continent, to some countries, so you can get a feel for where you might want to live, and then make sure you can figure that out. My last live, 2 lives ago, I did Don't Move to Africa, and so definitely watch that if you want to know what things you should be thinking about if you're planning to move. All right. I have consulting services. I also allow people to market their brand on my social media. I have a little over 200,000 followers across all platforms as of a couple weeks ago. So now that we've hit 200K, we are offering advertising to folks who would like to advertise on the platform. If you want to book a consulting session with me on how you can build your social media, or about the continent and moving to the continent, and you want to talk to me one-on-one outside of these live sessions, you can click on the link in my profile on Instagram or TikTok, or the link in the description of this video on YouTube, and you can book a session with me. All right, cool. So let's get into the news. So here was an interesting story, I thought, and I think it's a relevant story because I don't know how many people know about this, but I thought it was interesting. So President Biden dropped 4 countries from the African Growth and Opportunity Act trade program. So, he's announced that he intends to drop these 4 countries. So we're going to talk about the 4 countries. I'll talk a little bit about the trade program, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about the implications of it as well. So first of all, the 4 countries are Gabon, Niger, both of which just had coups, right? Gabon had a coup where the president of Gabon had a really good relationship with the United States, as far as I understand. Niger as well. And so, the U.S. condemned those 2 coups. Then we have the Central African Republic And then we also have Uganda. Now, Uganda is on this list, I'm sure, because of the anti-LGBTQ Act that they have just recently put into place, which the United States had widely condemned in terms of political officials, right? Anthony Blinken, Secretary of State, and other people put out statements against it. And if you might remember, a few weeks ago, maybe about 2 months ago, I did a video on the implications of Uganda's doing that act and the World Bank removing funding. And we said when the World Bank removes funding, there may be other follow-on consequences, right? There may be other countries taking action against them. Now, there was two ways to look at it, right? There's one way to look at it is we need to stop relying as a continent of Africa on the West, right? There's another way to look at it and say, that's much needed for the advancement of that country, and maybe they should rethink that decision. Whatever side of the aisle you live on, that's the status of where it is today. Shout out to Lenore. Lenore's in the building. What's up, Lenore? Let's see can I put that up on the screen? Let's see. Oh, there we go. Yeah. What's up, Lenore? Lenore's there. All right, cool. So here's the story. He announced that he was going to remove them from the trade program. The decision comes in the response to what he referred to as serious violations of internationally recognized human rights by the Central African Republic and Uganda. So earlier on, the U.S. government had issued a business advisory to notify U.S. businesses, individuals, and other U.S. entities about business risks under Uganda's recently enacted Anti-Homosexuality Act, despite intensive engagement between the United States, and this is coming from the Speaker of the House. Sorry, this is coming from a letter from President Biden to the Speaker of the House. Despite intensive engagement between the United States and the Central African Republic, Gabon, Niger, and Uganda, these countries have failed to address United States concerns about their non-compliance with the AGOA eligibility criteria. President Biden did say he intends to withdraw the beneficiary status of these countries as sub-Saharan African nations under AGOA, with the termination taking effect from January 1st, 2024. So, look, I think all of us need to understand that as a continent of Africa, the goal is to become independent, right? The goal is not to have to depend on aid from the West. The idea is intercontinental trade in order to increase GDP, get more people working, and to further each country's independence from other countries, and as a whole, the continent's independence. Some of these things are accelerating that process, right? And so, people may disagree with what the United States has done, but I think we can all agree that we want to see an independent continent of Africa. And that's going to be the theme of some of the news stories we have today is Africa's dependency or independence or moving towards independence. That's going to be the theme of some of the news stories today. And I think it's important to talk about this because it's a conversation that comes up a lot. And, I think some of the decisions the continent, countries on the continent are making will accelerate the process of Africa's independence. So with that, let's move on to the next story. Actually, let's talk about some of the implications of this. So there's some implications, and I did want to go through them a bit. So one is the economic impact, right? The termination of AGOA benefits could have a significant economic impact on the affected countries as they no longer have duty-free access to the United States market. So you guys might have gone through an airport and you see duty-free, right? And I guess in this instance, that just means that you don't have that access anymore, where you don't have access to being able to do trade with less taxes or no taxes. And so that's one element that's going to cause some challenges. The political impact. So that could result in reduced exports, job losses, and decreased foreign investment. So the political impact is the termination of AGOA benefits could also have political implications. It could also put a strain on the relationship between the U.S. and the affected countries. It could also lead to increased political instability in these countries, at least according to um, articles out there, as they may struggle to find alternative markets for those exports that they were exporting to the United States. There's a potential human rights impact that's based on articles. The termination of this could potentially have a positive impact on human rights in the affected countries, as it sends a message that the U.S. will not tolerate what they call gross violations of human rights. So what they're saying is, by doing this, maybe some of the changes will happen to those laws, or what they're calling gross violations, and potentially will get them back in the U.S.'s good graces to become a part of this deal. That's at least what these articles are saying. So what can these countries do, right? They can diversify their exports. These countries could explore other markets for those exports, such as Europe, Asia, or other African countries. This is the ideal scenario. They could involve developing regional trade agreements, which we've talked about. ECOWAS is a regional entity, right? The Economic Community of West African States. You also have in East Africa, you have the East Africa Federation, which is also a East Africa community, and they work on tourism and trade. And so those are some of the things that can be done. So strengthening regional integration. They could change and improve what the U.S. is considering human rights record and human rights violations, and regain access. Or they could just develop new partnerships that they can explore with other entities and trade organizations, like the World Trade Organization, which already removed funding from Uganda. But there are other places, the European Union, Russia, and China, etc. So overall, determination for these countries could have a significant impact and implications on the relationship with the U.S., and it remains to see how these countries will respond. So that is the story of the U.S. deciding to remove or drop these 4 countries from the AGOA. Okay. Any questions, comments, thoughts as on that story? Let me see if I missed anything on IG. I'm just scrolling through here. This is really crazy that I have no camera on this laptop, by the way. That was unexpected. Apple Watch Plug 215 is naming all the people from Philly: Kevin Hart, Meek Mill. Yeah, so 215 is a Philadelphia area code. Look at that, still having the memory of different area codes in the States. All right, cool. So Kenya. So this is a good. This is a move in the right direction, right? In terms of movement on the continent. As someone who has the 2 passport privilege, right? So I have a passport from Sierra Leone. I am a Sierra Leonean citizen, but I also have a passport from the United States. I'm a U.S. citizen, and because of that, there are different places I can travel with and without visas. So Eddie's asking where I am. I am in, oh, by the way, shout out to Pearl Hotel on Lomley Beach Road in Freetown, Sierra Leone. This is their penthouse suite. As you can see, it's very spacious. There's a lot of room behind me, and there's 2 bedrooms back that way. I'm sitting in the bar area. They have bar stools here, and the kitchen's behind the camera. But yeah, and then the dining room is over there to the left. It's pretty big, spacious, 2 bedroom, 2 bathroom penthouse here at Pearl Hotel. And they allow me to use this space almost weekly if I'm in Freetown. And so I have to thank Mars and the folks at Pearl Hotel. And of course, I've also stayed here about 5 times throughout the years. So definitely recommend this place as a place to stay. I should have said this earlier, but to all of you who are still watching, definitely would recommend coming and staying at Pearl if you have the funds. All right, cool. So let's talk about Kenya and this visa-free travel. So a couple things. So first of all, Kenya to scrap visas for all African visitors by year end. So President William Ruto has announced plans to eliminate visa requirements for Africans visitors by the end of 2023. So why does this matter? This is a really important matter. And here's why it matters. So my US passport gives me the right to do visa on arrival in Kenya. My Sierra Leone passport would require me to go to the Kenyan embassy here in Sierra Leone, apply for a visa, get them to agree to allow me to travel, then I could travel to Kenya. Do you guys see a problem with that? Right? Um, Many African countries have to go through hoops to be able to travel to other African countries. I mean, even neighboring countries sometimes have these issues if they're not in the same regional bloc. Now, I can travel to anywhere in West Africa without a visa on my Sierra Leone passport. But anywhere outside of West Africa that I'm traveling, I usually use my US passport. For example, I went to Egypt in 2021. When I went to Egypt in 2021, I used my US passport, did visa on arrival. When I went to Tanzania about 3, 4 weeks ago, I used my US passport, did visa on arrival. Both of those two countries, Egypt and Tanzania, had I wanted to go using my Sierra Leone passport, I would have had to go to those embassies in Sierra Leone, apply for a visa to go to 2 other African countries. Europe does not do this. If you guys know anybody in Europe, if you know Germans go to Italy for fun on vacation on a weekend. You know, London people from London in the UK go to Germany, they go to France. Like they just move throughout Europe, no issue. Why does Africa and our 54 countries make it a challenge for each of us to visit our own country, our own continent, but Europeans and Americans can do it without any issue? You can just land and do a visa on arrival. That's a problem. So that's why this news is so significant right here, with Kenya scrapping visas for all African visitors by the end of the year. Because that means that now anyone from any of the other 53 countries outside of Kenya, if you have a passport from those countries, you can now enter into Kenya without a visa. The other thing about visas is they cost money, right? So you are spending money to enter into another country that is on the same continent, which really never made any sense. So President Russo said by this year end, no African will need a visa to enter Kenya. The time has come to understand the importance of doing trade between us. He also stressed the importance of addressing the current low levels of intra-African trade and puts forward a proposal to reduce customs tariffs across the continent to accelerate the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. That's another really important thing that needs to be done, right? Because trade between the African countries is also difficult, which makes no sense because trade with Europe is easy, right? And that's the crazy part about this, right? Is like to do business and to move around on our own continent. There's so many challenges, and we put these challenges in ourselves for our own selves. And so this is something, as you can tell, something I'm passionate about because I was shocked when I was planning to go to Egypt. I was like, oh, I'll just go with my Sierra Leone passport. And then I read through the visa requirements. I'm like, man, all right, well, what do I do if I use my US passport? Oh, visa on arrival, $25. All right, well then I'll do that. Now I have that privilege. But I think about like my family members that live here in Sierra Leone, and people always ask them, how come you don't travel to other parts of Africa? Because it's difficult. You know, I had a Nigerian coworker. We had one more story on this, and then we'll move on to Rwanda making the same decision. In 2021, we as a company, Jumia, was having a sales conference in Egypt, right? And so the idea of this conference was to get us all together to have a better understanding of how to communicate our value proposition to different advertisers around the world that were advertising on Jumia, you know, an e-commerce company around the continent of Africa. When we were going through the process of applying to go, you know, I myself was one of 2 people who had passports from outside of the continent of Africa, right? The head of advertising for Senegal was a French citizen, so she had a French passport. I was a US citizen, had my US passport. We both had no issue using our French and US passports to go to Egypt, right? We landed, $25. We had our $25. What do you call it? Visa on arrival, and then we just moved about the country freely. We had a guy in Nigeria who lives in Lagos. Okay, the Egyptian embassy is not in Lagos; it's in Abuja. So he had to actually travel 3 hours north to go to Abuja to an appointment that the guy from the Egyptian embassy didn't even show up for. So ended up going back home, had to come back again, only to be denied a visa to go to Egypt. Right, Nigeria to Egypt. So this is the problem. This is a real problem for many people who have African passports. And so now you can generally move around your sub region, right? So ECOWAS, East African Federation, but to go across to different regions, that's where the challenges are. And many West African countries have more issues traveling to other places in Africa. So that I think is really important for you guys to hear, because I don't know if many people know that. I didn't even know that. As someone who had Sierra Leone citizenship 2 years prior to moving to the continent of Africa, I had no idea that this was a thing, but it is a thing. And it's very difficult for people to travel back and forth to different countries on the continent of Africa. So I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of that, and that you know that that's why this story is so important, that Kenya has removed the visa requirements. Now, beyond that, also last week, Rwanda announced visa-free travel for all Africans. So they announced it on last Thursday, that it will allow Africans to travel visa-free to the country, becoming the latest nation on the continent to announce such a measure, aiming to boost movement of people and trade to rival Europe's, what is it called? The Schengen zone. President Kagame made the announcement in the Rwanda capital, Kigali, where he pitched the potential of Africa as a unified tourism destination for a continent that still relies on 60% of its tourists from outside of Africa. Well, of course, 60% of the tourists will come from outside of Africa if you make it difficult for other Africans to visit your country, right? That's an obvious thing. So, and that's according to the data from the United Nations Economic Commission of Africa. So any African can get on a plane to Rwanda whenever they wish, and they will not pay a thing to enter our country. That's what Kagame said during the 23rd Global Summit of the World Travel and Tourism Council. We should not lose sight of our own continental market. He said, Africans are the future of global tourism as our middle class continues to grow at a fast pace in the decades to come. So, obviously they see the importance of ensuring that there is free travel and trade between the countries on the continent of Africa, especially as African countries are being removed from a lot of these different international bodies, right? And so these announcements are a kind of a first step towards, free movement of Africans on the continent of Africa. All right, so before we move on, there are a couple of things that are being said that I want to make sure that I address. So Jagifta says, thanks to the BRICS, they are open for business to stop such slavery methods from the oppressors of Western countries, because one man's meal is another one's poisoning. Okay. There are many different things going on in this statement. I agree with some of them, but I don't know exactly where you're going with this. Maybe if you want to rephrase this, I'd love to maybe take another crack at trying to read it and see if I understand exactly what you are saying. Let's see what else you said. So Jagif said, when it comes about the visas in Africa, it's just stupid mental illness in their own minds, because those changes are still happening in their minds. Okay. Yeah, puppets. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think, removing the visas makes a lot of sense. So I told you guys a story about going to Egypt and the issue there, right? I told you guys about, even for me as someone who's a dual passport holder, what I have to do to be able to travel back and forth between different countries, and how using my US passport makes it easy for me to go anywhere outside of West Africa, which is crazy, right? Sometimes you have to apply for a visa from the US, but it's an easy process. Like, it's really easy. Whereas for other Africans, they make it very, very difficult. And that's just a problem, right? And so it's really good to see that Rwanda has now joined Kenya. And then, just so you all know, there are now 5 visa-friendly countries in Africa. Excuse the capital F here. So there's 5 countries. So with Kenya and Tanzania being the latest 2, there were 3 that already allowed all 53 other countries outside of them to enter their country visa-free. So Benin and the Gambia, which of course I can also go to visa-free anyway because they're part of ECOWAS, Economic Community of West African States. So I can go to both of them on my Sierra Leone passport. And I've already been to the Gambia earlier this year. Content coming soon, guys, this month. But also Seychelles. So with my Sierra Leone passport, I can go to Seychelles, which I did not know until I started working on this content. So that's really good to know because everybody talks about Seychelles, and I'm looking forward to going there at some point in time in the near future. But I can go there with my Sierra Leone passport, visa-free. Benin is another one, of course, that people talk about. So Kenya, I'll be going later this year. Unfortunately, I don't think the visa-free travel for Africans doesn't start until December 31st, if I'm not mistaken, which I will be there by December 28th. So I will probably have to use visa on arrival with my US passport to enter Kenya. So Rwanda will become the 5th country in Africa to remove travel restrictions for other Africans. The African Union in 2016 launched an African passport with a lot of fanfare. People have been asking me about this African passport. Now, it was saying that it would rival the European Union model on unleashing the potential of the continent. However, here's the issue. Only diplomats and the African Union officials have been issued the travel document so far. So we got this African passport that the African Union launched in 2016, which, if my math serves me correct, that is 7 years ago. But the only people who've been able to get those passports today are African Union officials and diplomats. So people have been asking about this passport, and that's who's gotten it so far. Now, it was aimed at removing restrictions on Africans' ability to travel, work, and live within their own continent. That's what the AU website says. But as you can see, there are still restrictions, and it's still not open and available to everyone as of yet. So they also launched the African Continental Free Trade Area, a continent-wide free trade area estimated to be worth about $3.4 trillion, which aims to create a single unified market for the continent's 1.3 billion people and to boost economic development. But again, even with that in place, there are still a lot of challenges with intercontinental trade, right? So these are the steps in the right direction, but we're still not there yet. There's been a lot of announcements by the African Union throughout the last few years, but very little implementation to allow for some of the things that will benefit from. And I know it's coming, and I'm looking forward to it, but it's just not here yet. So at least a step in the right direction is these 5 countries: Kenya, Benin, Seychelles, Gambia, and Tanzania. And Rwanda, not Tanzania, and Rwanda. So of these countries, I'll be in Kenya later this year, went to Gambia earlier this year. Hopefully I get to Benin and Seychelles next year, and Rwanda next year. I have a friend from Rwanda, so I'm looking forward to going out there and seeing what that's all about. So I thought it was important to talk about this because we were talking about, Africa's independence and some of the things that's impacting the continent of Africa. And I think these stories are really positive stories. And I also thought it was important for you guys to get that context. Not everybody is aware of how difficult it is to travel around the continent of Africa with an African passport. So many people are excited to become Ghanaian citizens one day because they heard that you can become a Ghanaian citizen, which is not as easy as you think. Or you can get your Sierra Leone passport, which is great. It's a good step in the right direction, but that only applies to West Africa, right? This economic community of West African states. And so that would mean you'd have to use your dual passport privilege to go to any other countries outside of West Africa if you want a smoother landing and ability to get in. So that is what I wanted to mention on the visa front. Now, here is another story on, I don't know if it's still dependence It's energy independence, but also dependence on someone to get it off the ground. But Burkina Faso signed a deal in October for a Russian nuclear power plant. So the military leaders have signed a deal with Russia to build a nuclear power plant to increase electricity supplies. It's the junta's latest move to align himself with Russia after falling out with most of the Western powers, right? So when the junta took over in the coup in Burkina Faso, many of the Western allies condemned it, namely France. If you guys might remember, France was giving them $1 billion a year in aid, but extracting. Sorry, that was that Niger or France? Now it's all sorry, is in Niger or Burkina Faso. But either way, France has always been meddling in the affairs of West Africa, and also in a lot of ways um, taking more than giving, right? And so that led to, of course, a coup in Burkina Faso, amongst many other things. But that meant that they lost their good standing with a lot of Western businesses or Western countries. And so that meant that they went elsewhere to look for partnerships. And, as with Cuba previously, now with countries on the continent of Africa, you're seeing people connect with those folks in the Far East. Now, some people might say you're doing a deal with someone who is similar or even maybe worse than who you were trying to do business with before. Many people, though, here on the continent believe that these moves here are better for their countries than what they had been previously doing, because it does lead technically to more independence. Now, we're going to talk about this, and then I'm going to talk about my own thoughts on nuclear power, because I think this is an important thing, especially for someone like myself who's very big into sustainable energy. So the junta has turned to Russia for economic and military support since it seized power last year. Burkina Faso is one of the latest electrified countries globally, with only, one of the least electrified countries globally, with only 21% of people connected to power. 21% of people connected to power. We have very similar circumstances here in Sierra Leone, similar circumstances in countries like Nigeria, like many of you guys know. So the junta requested President Putin's support in setting up a nuclear power plant in Burkina Faso, which he said would help meet the country's energy demands and those neighboring countries. He actually, this deal with Russia is accumulation of talks that he had with Russia when they visited during the Russia-Africa Summit in Moscow a couple months ago. And one of the quotes he had said during that time is, "We have a critical need for energy. This is an important point for me because we need, if possible, to build a nuclear power station in Burkina Faso to produce electricity." This is what he was quoted as saying at the time. Now, by the way, this guy is just over 30 years old, if I'm not mistaken. He's a pretty young guy, and he's not playing around on the different moves that he's making for Burkina Faso. Whether you agree or not with the coup, at least in terms of what he's attempting to do, he's moving quickly. Now, here are my thoughts on nuclear power. You guys might remember there are a couple of nuclear power plant disasters that have happened. You have Chernobyl, you have 3 Mile Island, and there was one in Japan, which, forgive me, I've forgotten the name. So they're not immune to their issues. And if there's a nuclear power plant meltdown, it impacts the environment around it for an unforeseen amount of time. Nobody knows just how long the animals, the drinking water, the air quality is going to be impacted, not let alone humans. I remember when I was in high school, we learned about Chernobyl. Was I in high school or was I in college? We learned about Chernobyl, and animals born with 2 heads, extra legs, all kinds of other different things. Nobody lived in Chernobyl for years after that because the drinking water was so bad, the air quality was so bad. So many people were getting sick and dying. So people had to just it became an abandoned city. Somewhere that was thriving with work and had a giant nuclear facility was just now an abandoned place. And so, although we need energy independence on the continent of Africa, it is very hot here. It does require a lot of really, really, really good, precise people working there. All I can just think about now is the fact that Homer Simpson worked at a nuclear power plant in on that show. What's that show? The Simpsons. And how many times were there nuclear meltdowns on that show? So these are just things that you have to think about when it comes to nuclear power. Now, my opinion on nuclear power is this: sustainable energy on a large scale is going to be very difficult, meaning solar on a very, very large scale. Because right now, all solar does is charge a battery, and you use that battery for as long as that battery will last to power your house. Disposing of those batteries is still environmentally unfriendly. Also, the process of making solar panels has a large carbon footprint. So you have a large carbon footprint to then have a, generally, not everywhere, but not always, but in general, large carbon footprint to have a sustainable energy source. And so, although I'm a person who's going to opt for solar power anyway, just because of noise pollution and air pollution, just know that it's not a carbon neutral process to obtain it or to dispose of the battery. And it's also not the best of solutions for global electrification. What seems to be that in the near term is nuclear power. And I was a person who was always against it. I always thought solar and wind and water were the only ways, but each of those are limited to if it's windy, if you have a high tide, and if you have a battery source to store the power of the solar panel, right? And so those are with limits. Science has not gotten to a place yet where that energy can be harvested and held and not in battery form, right? And so with that, it seems as if nuclear power is the next best option to electrify people in a larger scale. Now, this isn't just to electrify, this is not just to put on TVs and use the microwave, but you see outcomes in terms of education, hospitals. Think about this. Somebody's hooked up to a ventilator and power fails and the backup generator doesn't come on in time. Somebody's hooked up to a defibrillator, any of these things that require a quick flip from the energy grid to some source of backup power, and any interruption in that can mean loss of life, right? Not to mention students studying, right? Many people need more hours to study. You get home from school, it's 3 o'clock, you eat dinner, you maybe have after school activities, whatever it is you do. By the time it's study time, it's dark, 7 p.m., whatever it is, it's dark. So how are you going to be able to study as a child, as an adult student, right, in college, whatever, without light, right? And it makes it more difficult if you're utilizing your phone flashlight or these tap lights and things like that. It really makes it less convenient, and it reduces positive outcomes when you have no light. I was not aware of all of this. I was just thinking I need solar power, and I think everyone needs solar power, because who doesn't want to have electricity? You want to have your fridge, you want to have your microwave, you want to have a washer and dryer. That's not even most people's concerns. Fridge, microwave, washer and dryer. They wash clothes by hand. They eat food that they make that day. They don't store it the next day. And many people don't have microwaves, right? What they need, though, is the ability to study at night. What you need is hospitals that can run 24/7 uninterrupted, right? And so that is why and there are many other benefits of having continuous electrification. And if you're in a country with only 21% of the people are connected to power, you can see why the outcomes can be limited, right? So I don't want to stress that too much, but I wanted to make sure that that was clear, why I see why he made this deal. Now, the other question is, do you want to do deals with Russia? If Putin is ever out of power is the next Russian leader going to continue with this? What are the stipulations of the deal? Is it going to be a good deal, for Burkina Faso? Or is it another one of these huge debt deals that have been signed over the last 20 something years with countries or companies outside of the continent that will never get paid back, but that put the continent and these countries in debt, which means they're not truly independent. What do I mean by that? Um, I don't think that every African country needs to jump out and condemn everything that everyone else does just because America says they should. However, I think every country should have the ability to do so without worrying about the trade deal that they just signed being torn up and being removed and not being honored because they didn't side with someone doing something that might be a humanitarian crisis, right? And so, that's the thing. That's the pitfall of doing a deal like this. But look, the United States didn't offer a deal like this. No one else did. And so, they've decided to go with Russia, and we'll see if this comes to fruition. And if it does, what are the implications, the long term uh, changes and effects to the continent of Africa? All right. Um, Shoot was saying something. I can't see, you just said never mind, and but I didn't see what you were originally asking. But okay, so Ja Tight says, Ja Gift Ta says, why Sierra Leone doesn't have a fight for themselves with all the rich minerals resources they have. That is a question. I think that's an interesting one, and I will say this, and I've mentioned this before, and there's another story about this. The continent of Africa has obviously, since the beginning of time, had the richest soil and the richest minerals of any other continent, right? Gold, platinum, uranium, vibranium. I'm joking about the vibranium thing. But all of the different precious metals are found in the lands on the continent of Africa, right? You find biodiversity in terms of animals, biodiversity in terms of humans, genetic makeup. The shortest tribe of people in the world is right next to the tallest tribe of people in the world on average, right? How is that possible? We as a continent have that much genetic diversity. The plants on the continent have genetic diversity. Going to Tanzania and seeing, all the different plants and things that they had native there that were brought in that can still thrive in those countries, being here in Sierra Leone, the animal population. So everything is diverse, and the minerals as well. However, throughout the last 100 years, in some ways through unfair deals, in other ways through just the theft, these minerals have been extracted for very few gain and not for the gain of the countries they are being extracted from. What you have is the mining of the raw materials by international brands and companies mining on the continent of Africa, shipping it out, and doing what you need to do to refine it and sell it for 10x. So the cobalt that is being mined from the continent of Africa is being mined at a very fraction of the price that it's being sold to make batteries, MacBooks, iPhones, Samsung phones, televisions, microwaves, fridges, everything, all the stuff these raw materials leave and are making. Even cocoa, right? There aren't very many chocolate plants, chocolate factories on the continent of Africa. Most of the cocoa is exported, chocolate is made there, and then imported here. I can't tell you how many different types of chocolate I see at all of the airports I go to around the continent of Africa that is the cocoa came from here, but this chocolate is sold at a premium in this same country or on the same continent. So your question is a valid one, Ja Gift Ty, Ty, and I think the basic answer is these deals have been in place for a long time. It is what the circumstances are as they are, um, and the only thing that we can do is create new trade deals. That's the ideal scenario, is that Africa works to create new trade deals, and move away from dependence, and continuing of just raw materials. But what also needs to happen is manufacturing by local companies and countries need to happen on the continent. In the same way China spent a great deal of time in the 80s and the 90s building factories, where the U.S. actually outsourced the building of most of their raw materials and products and stuff to China to re-import them. The continent of Africa needs to start building its own factories to be able to take, let's say, crude oil, refine it, and to be able to utilize it on the continent, and then also to sell that to other people, especially when there's a situation like what's happening in the Ukraine. It'd be great if Nigeria, who is a large oil producer of crude oil, could actually refine that oil and then sell that to Europe, right? Burkina Faso, Ghana has oil as well, right? I mean, ideally that's the scenario, and so we have to get there, but we're not there yet. There's a long way to go. All right, there's a couple more questions and comments here that I'm seeing that I want to just get to. Let's see. So Jagiv says, I hope the next president of Russia will respect those deals, or else they're going to lose, because Western countries always promise and they never deliver or fulfill. That is definitely what a lot of people say. Shoot, Bebop Rock Steady says, and when they extract and take, they go in waste and mismanage it in their countries on their, which makes them want to take more. Yeah. Andy G says, the main minerals mined in Sierra Leone are diamonds, rutile, bauxite, gold, iron, and limonite. Is it limonite? Limonite? But yeah, I do know about rutile and I do know about bauxite. Gold, obviously, and of course the diamonds. So Swiss chocolate is actually African chocolate. Can you believe that? Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Cocoa, as far as I understand, didn't naturally grow anywhere outside of Latin America, and I think it might have even been brought there from Africa to Latin America. So because Brazil has cocoa, I think a few other countries in Latin America, or I should say South America, grow raw cocoa. So imagine you're eating Swiss chocolate and you're calling it Swiss chocolate, but it's really refined and turned into chocolate bars in Switzerland, but it's really Ghanaian chocolate or African chocolate, right? That's the world we live in today. And so many people don't even know this. People aren't aware of this, but this is what life is like. And this is where we are. So with some changes that need to be made. Okay, so Jagifta says the Sierra Leone government should stand firm on building factories for all that is extracted from the country. Yes, I'd love to see that. I do know that there are some factories here that start the process but still export. So I think we need to refine these things and be able to export it in its final form, where it's worth a whole lot more, and that we can generate a whole lot more revenue for the country or countries that produce those raw materials. All right, cool. Let me take a quick hydration break. All right. Moving on to the next story. Oh yeah, here. Okay, here. Okay. So this is the yeah this is the final story that I wanted to go over. I thought this was interesting. Um, all right, let me just read through the story and then I'll give my thoughts. So Germany asked for forgiveness for Tanzania colonial crimes or Tanzania colonial crimes. So what does that mean? So German president, and I haven't heard his name said, so probably gonna butcher it. We're just gonna call him Frank Walter Steinmeier, has expressed shame for the colonial atrocities his country inflicted on Tanzania. So I don't know if many of you guys are aware of this. Okay, we are going to lose the Instagram live in a little over 10 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this live and then I'm going to jump back on for a part two on Instagram. And so you guys just hold tight. I'll be right back on IG. All right. So all of you guys watching on other platforms, just give me a moment to save this and go back live on Instagram. Da, 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 da. So, because I do want to get into this story about um, about Germany apologizing, because I think it's interesting and I think it's necessary, but it's definitely interesting. It's not something I expected to see or even anticipated in any way or thought it was required, but it's interesting to see that that's what they did. All right, cool. All right, so we're gonna go live in just a moment again on Instagram so we can get that back up. All right, so we're now live again on Instagram for part two on Instagram, and then just continuing the conversation across all the other platforms where we're having these conversations. So again, we talked about in part one, for those of you who are joining on Instagram, we talked about all the news stories that were happening on the continent of Africa, Burkina Faso, getting a nuclear power plant. We talked about, Biden removing a bunch of countries from AGOA. We talked about Tanzania, visa-free travel for all Africans. We talked about Kenya's visa-free travel for all Africans. And now we are talking about Germany asking for forgiveness for the Tanzania colonial crimes. So what actually happened that they're asking for forgiveness for? So German forces killed almost 300,000 people during what was called the Maji Maji Rebellion of the early 1900s, one of the bloodiest anti-colonial uprisings. So the Maji Maji Rebellion was triggered by a German policy designed to force the indigenous population to grow cotton for export. Tanzania was part of the German East Africa, which consisted of modern-day Rwanda, Burundi, and parts of Mozambique. During his visit to Tanzania, President Steinmeier asked for forgiveness for what Germans did to the ancestors of Tanzanians. President Steinmeier was speaking at the museum where the uprising actually took place. And so what he said was, "I'd like to ask forgiveness for what Germans did to your ancestors here," he said. "What happened here is our shared history, the history of your ancestors and the history of our ancestors in Germany." Now, Shoot says, "Tell Germany we need those processing manufacturing," because they do process and manufacture a lot of the stuff that comes out of the continent of Africa. Jagifta says, "Germans are just pretending," while one of them said they garden and the rest of the world is in the jungle. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we have to think about here is the stance that Germany has been taking under Angela Merkel and under this guy here. So over the last, I would say 15 years, Germany has taken a very, very liberal approach to a number of different things, I think, to overcorrect for their past history. You guys might remember there was one political party there in the 1930s, and they attempted to eradicate a minority there. A minority that had, outsized power and influence in the country. Nonetheless, though, done legally and done the right way, but for whatever reason, they felt like they didn't want them there. And so, almost the entire country moved on one accord, all agreeing with this one political party, which led to, of course, um, what we know as the Holocaust, right? And so it seems to me that Germany has been really trying to overcorrect for this. I think when Angela Merkel was in office, I can't remember the exact number, if it was 13 million immigrants were let into the country during her time. They also have liberal rules for or laws for immigrants, which to me, I think, to be honest with you, I think the world should be open to everyone. That's just my belief system. These borders are artificial. It makes no sense. But I understand for certain elements of government aid given to people, you have, your citizens, and then you have non-citizens, and you want to make sure that's getting to the citizens because those people pay the taxes to be able to benefit from these programs. So you don't want to just make sure it's going to other people who aren't actually paying into the system. But if they're paying into the system, then they should benefit. And to me, I don't see it as an issue. To be honest with you, as a child of two immigrants in the United States, and as an immigrant now to the continent of Africa, and my belief system is that you should be able to move around the world as you so choose. All these borders are artificial anyway, so especially on the continent of Africa, they were imposed on Africans to begin with, and so you know, so to me, I think that what Germany has been doing is trying to overcorrect for what they did previously. And so, I appreciate the gesture. What I would like to see, though, is actual policies. I'd like to see the returning of stolen artifacts. I'd like to see the um, the build out of an independence by African countries that are working with other countries. I'd like to see the restructuring of deals that they have and trade deals they have in place to ensure that they actually benefit the people on the continent of Africa. Um, so, uh, okay, Jagifta says Angela Merkel was better within the European policies. There you go. That's Jagifta's belief system. So, and so Seal Cipher Divine says, bingo, reparations and royalties. Yes, yes. Reparations have been paid to so many different groups. I did a live on reparations before, and I went through different reparations given to different groups in the United States and abroad. And so I do think that you do need to do reparations for what has been stolen. It's interesting. When we have these, G7 summits and all these different summits, these global summits, um, what happens a lot is Europeans always talk about how Africa has so much developing to do, but they don't talk about how much they are extracting from the continent of Africa, right? And how the policies that they benefit from are actually negatively impacting the continent of Africa. What's interesting is many of the world powers today on the West directly benefit from or benefited from extracting some type of resources from the continent of Africa, whether that was natural resources in the ground or human resources physically to help build the country that many of you enjoy being in the States. And so, when you really think about, if it wasn't for those natural minerals and those human resources, where do you think the United States would be? It wouldn't be the United States. And what do you think Europe would be like today? What do you really think Europe would be like today if it wasn't for that? And so these are the things that we have to think about, right? When we talk about Africa being so far behind, I hear this conversation all the time. We're so far behind. We're so far behind. Well, yeah, I mean, there are many factors that led to that. And if you look at any country that's 70 years old in its history, and I've made this analogy before. If you look at what England was like in its first 75 years of existence, it was a wild, wild place. If you look at America, the United States, in the first 75 years of its existence, it was a wild, wild place. So, if you think about the continent of Africa, considering its history, the continent of Africa has fared far better than many other countries. And when I say the continent of Africa, I mean each individual country, especially in terms of their independence from European rule. They've actually done really well compared to what other countries have done within their first 75 years. Now, there are other countries that are doing much better in recent years. But I'm just saying, around the world. But I'm just saying you can understand a little bit why it's an issue. Okay. Whew, man, it's been a long day. Started really early at 5 a.m. and it's just after 10 p.m. GMT. So there's some more questions and comments. Solo Her says Germany has been giving billions to Israel every year. Europe also talks like this, but they refuse to return African art to their museums. Don't fall for what Germany is saying. So that's exactly what I was saying before, right? I think it's a good gesture, but I'd like to see policies and things returned, and reparations as well. So yes, that is the frame of mind I have. So Jagifta is asking a question about skulls. Why did European countries still keeping the skulls of those Africans they murdered long ago? It's a good question. Only the museum curators would know the answer to that. I'm sure it's something we can Google, but I don't know. It's a really good question, and I feel like maybe it doesn't make sense to keep those skulls at all. I mean, if anything, return them back to their home countries and let the people in those home countries dispose of them as they choose. Okay. We have covered a lot of ground today. Before we go, are there any other questions that people have? There's a couple questions that are coming in on Instagram, so I want to address these questions really quickly. Let me exit out of screen sharing. So let's see. What do we have? The African diaspora release should pay more attention to geopolitics. That's what Authentic African Instagram page is all about, to try to help with that. Let's see. See All Cipher Divine says the African diaspora release. Oh no, that's you. That was I just read that. Sorry. As I'm scrolling by. Okay. See All Cipher Divine says, what is the best country for expats and land development? Watch my the live that I said don't move to Africa. I'm going to give you a list of things that you should check to make that determination. There are articles out there that say a lot of different things. They talk about GDP, they talk about farming, they talk about access to land, they talk about cost of living, all of those different things. But really, for you, if you're talking about moving, then you want to visit first. If you're talking about strictly business, a quick Google search will give you the answer to that. And I'm going to be doing some videos on this channel, the YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, everything, about top best countries to do business in, a number of different things. They're coming. It's in the works. Just give me some time. Don't worry. It's in the works. It'll be coming soon. Excuse me. Sorry. All right. Any other questions, comments? Jagif Todd says, thanks for the good work. Keep it up, bro. Thank you for joining. I appreciate it. All right, guys. I have to give this room back to the good folks here at Pearl Hotel. I am not spending the night here, and I do have a distance to go to get home. So I want to give myself some time and see what's and get home. Get home. I have a long, busy day tomorrow, ending in a cocktail hour. But starting with maybe shooting some news. So Lenora says, thank you again. Thank you, Lenora. Solar Her asked the question: you think the French will simply walk away or try to sabotage their former colonial friends? I mean, it's no secret they funded. Okay, I can't. I know I've heard different things. They've been blamed for different things. I don't want to say anything that will be considered false news because the platforms don't really like that. So I can't read the rest of your question, but we'll see what happens on that front. Yeah, yeah says, thank you, Joe. Very insightful. Thank you for joining. As always, yeah, you've been a very great supporter for a long time. Helped a friend in Tanzania. You made some introductions for me. So I do want to shout out Ya. Her name is Ya. The name of the company is Talking Drums Travel. And so she does curated trips to different countries around the continent of Africa, one of which is Tanzania, another which is Ghana. And she has other countries that she's doing. And so you guys should check her out at Talking Drums Travel. And I also want to shout out a few other people. Manelik, who joins the live a lot and has been doing the timestamps for the lives. I really appreciate him. Shout out to Lenora for the good advice you've given me throughout the year that I've known you. Let's see who else is on that's always on. There's a lot of new people today. I noticed. Miss P, shout out to you. Anne Marie Harding, shout out to you. Of course, you guys have been around forever and following the channel and really supporting, commenting, and whatnot. So I appreciate it. So everybody who's watching, make sure you hit that thumbs up. Make sure you share this with at least 3 people you know who are looking to visit or move to Africa or want to know more about what's happening on the continent of Africa. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. All right, guys, with that, thanks for watching. I will see you all on the next video.